It's a pleasure to be with you. Normally I have been on that seat. It's nice to be on this side today. Next time I will be again on your side. About this title, there are two notions that I would like to clarify first. European institutions or EU institutions, this kind of term is used in different ways depending on the context. Sometimes you mean exactly those 5 institutions that are in the treaty, Commission, Parliament, Council, Court of Justice and Court of Auditors. But sometimes you use it more broadly. You include then also European Central Bank, maybe even non-EU institutions like Council of Europe, and also sometimes the consultative bodies of the European Union, Committee of the Regions and Economic and Social Committee. Sometimes it's used also to mean certain 5, and that's my use today. I take the 3 main institutions, Commission, Council and Parliament, and the 2 consultative bodies which are involved in the decision making, so Committee of the Regions and Economic and Social Committee. So EU institutions here are the 5. And civil society organizations, what do I mean by that? Relatively broadly, something which is called as a third sector quite often in social sciences, NGOs, social movements, those which are not private business-making organizations, not public organizations. Now in this case, somehow, this part of civil society which is somehow in interaction with European institutions. So sometimes it's a question of so-called umbrella organizations, so that, for example, consumer policy organizations in the member states, they have created their representative organization at the European level. Or sometimes it's question of national civil society organizations who link between themselves in a European context, and then it becomes relevant to EU institutions. And also, as it was mentioned, Commission and European Union finances through different programs civil society organizations, and there sometimes even national civil society organizations can have a relationship with EU institutions. So relatively broad understanding of civil society in that. Now about my background, you heard where I'm coming from, and just to clarify in which role I'm talking today. So it's 16 years ago when I was last time lecturing to students, and since that I have not done academic research. So I'm not talking to you about anything based on research that I am doing or I have been doing. On the other hand, happily today I'm not speaking on behalf of the Commission. So I'm not telling you the official message of the European Commission. That's why I put in the official title, this is shortened now, reflections about this role. So I'm trying to reflect what I have experienced in Brussels in working in these institutions. So it's kind of reflective practitioner approach that I take today. Now, rules of the game. I hope what I will tell you will raise some questions, but I had some, actually here we could take the next slide also. The schedule of the lecture is here, and you see I have there 6 points or 5 points, and actually when I started to put some substance to these, I recognized that at least I could have made one lecture on each of these 6 points or 5 points. So a relatively heavy agenda. So I would say if you have, let's say, substance-related academic questions, let's take them at the end, so it's easier for me to master the time consumption. Now if you have technical questions about clarity, understanding, you are welcome. And of course, if you want to applaud in the meantime, I don't mind. Now, about these 5 points. First, the different academic perspectives. I will very quickly explain or show you a couple of angles that you can look at this. You can approach this question of relationship between EU organizations and civil society. It's just to raise your interest, so that if you are doing or planning your thesis or whatever related to these issues, that you recognize that, okay, also the question of civil society will come into the picture. Or other way around, if you are particularly interested in civil society, you might want to explore a little bit deeper one or another of these academic perspectives that I will mention. The Treaty of Lisbon will be just a reminder that something in relation to civil society and European institutions changed by the recent treaty review. Now, institutions' natural standpoints, I don't know whether this is a good English expression, but I will reflect a little bit at how the institutional position of different institutions, their way of working, how it actually has some consequences to their relationship to civil society organizations. And of course, then civil society organizations, when they work, when they want to influence, for example, at the European level, they have to take and adapt to this specific nature of the institutions. About European governance, principles and practices, I will just there mention a couple of the milestones in the European governance, how it has developed. Actually, I gave you some reading, and one of the articles was related to the European governance. Okay, but I take some points that are related notably to the relation of with civil society. And then finally, European Year of Volunteering. That's the story that this all was to be about. So that I will use one case where I have been personally involved as a commission civil servant to initiate in a formal role involved in making the commission proposal for that year which is now, so it's very topical. And if we have time, we will come to this story then at the end of the lecture. If we don't have time, I have the feeling that the issues that are before, they are to a certain extent also self-standing. They are interesting. I made it in this order on purpose. I could also start with the story and then give you some angles to, so to say, conceptualize the story. But I thought it's better actually to do it in this way. We go through the different background issues, and then you can use them already when you listen me about the story. Okay, about these academic perspectives. The first one, Neo-Functionalist integration theory. You probably are aware of that. It's one of the ways of understanding European integration. The basic principle there is that the whole way of how European Union, current Union, and the integration before that has been created was that you agree on what you can agree. And then there should be and is expected to be a kind of spillover effect, a snowball effect to other policy areas, and so that integration is actually feeding itself. And there is a lot of evidence on this kind of mechanism, and civil society can be considered as one of the sectors, so to say, and to see that, okay, also in civil society you can actually observe certain establishment at the European level. Now, interest representation is another research angle. You find a good number of scholars who are looking at how interest representation is organized in EU context, how it has developed, how many lobbyists there are, how many lobby organizations. Actually, I have not seen recently the picture about that, but it was very interesting, the number of lobbyists and lobby organizations. It started to grow very quickly after the Treaty of Rome, end of 50s, and then it stalled. It was very, very stable, not many organizations establishing at EU level until middle of 80s. And when there was then the new boost in the integration, very rapid growth. Last time when I saw it was still growing, but now I think that due to the economic crisis, there has been some policies, for example, concerning the regional level lobbyists. They have been closing offices or merging offices. So maybe there's a new trend that the growth is not so exponential anymore. Okay, civil society as such, as I mentioned, there are also a lot of scholars looking at the civil society or the third sector in society. What does it mean for democracy? What is the economic impact of that? What does it mean for civic participation issues? And of course, some of the scholars are looking at this issue in international context. And when you go to international context, then again, European integration, European Union is one of the possible cases. And so you find certain number of research focusing on civil society at the European level. European governance, that's the one that I gave you. I gave you some reading, and on this issue, this is very much about how the relationship between institutions and civil society has actually it came into the picture of the European governance early 2000, more or less at that time, and how it has evolved since that. You can have in your reading a short documentation on that. And there are a couple of colleagues who are looking at the governance issues in international context. And again, there are some specificities in the European case that was nicely described in the article that you had as background reading. In the same way, European Union and democracy, very interesting case, already as taking the point that question, should European Union be democratic? There's a political question also. Now, I would say that a kind of relatively realistic approach is that currently we are in the European integration in such a situation that it's a certain kind of necessity for the European Union to respond to certain expectations of the Union working in a democratic manner. It's a very complicated issue, the whole question of democracy. In the article that I gave you, and if somebody didn't read any of the articles, then take this one, the one related to European democracy, because it's a very interesting one. And there you see that a lot of attention has recently been paid to issues of deliberative democracy and more participatory democracy issues. And notably in that context, then of course, the civil society comes strongly into picture. You cannot, it's not only, they don't only come into the picture, they become very central actually. When you start to analyze the possible deliberative democracy models and opportunities, the conditions in European context. And finally, European citizenship or European or active European citizenship. It's an interesting issue. That's the one that I was working for a couple of years, and here there is one issue which is related to the question of identity and belonging together. That was shortly reflected also here when it was about the multi-level governance and where people identify themselves. But it's also an issue in a more pragmatic manner, that what kind of means there are at the European level for citizens to express, to take an active role. And for example, the volunteering issue that we take at the end of this lecture is one good example. Is there need and good reasons to facilitate possibilities for citizens to take active role, participate at the European level, not only in terms of participating in the political process, but also expressing solidarity, for example, between themselves in concrete actions. So take an active role in society like you take it in your communities. So this list is not comprehensive, but I think you cover here relatively a broad range of issues in which the question of relationship between European institutions and civil society comes into the picture. Now, as I said, I just wanted to remind you that the Treaty of Lisbon had an interesting issue on this issue. Now, just to to remind that the representative democracy is really anchored as the lead principle of the European Union. Article 10 of the Lisbon Treaty says that very clearly, and the European Parliament's role there as being directly elected by the people, that is the anchor of, let's say, the democratic nature of the European Union. However, this Article 11 then, after that, added certain means for participatory or deliberative democracy. And firstly, there is a paragraph on deliberation, putting a requirement for all the institutions to facilitate broad discussion on these issues, on European issues in society. Secondly, and this is very interesting, there's a paragraph saying that all the institutions should have open, transparent and regular dialogue with civil society and representative associations. Now, my friends in civil society area, they say, what does this mean? Civil society and representative associations. And it's very interesting to start to debate with them that what are representative associations. And you can understand it's never-ending discussion to how to define representative then. However, the meaning is clear. Institutions are required to have an open and transparent dialogue with them. When I actually first time read that article, I thought that there must be a mistake also in that terms, that it really say institutions. So it means that Court of Auditors should have an open and transparent and regular dialogue with civil society and representative associations. Now, in practice, this is certainly mainly applied to the 5 bodies that I mentioned, the 3 main institutions and the consultative bodies. So I will take these back into the picture. Now there's another requirement in the same article for Commission to hold broad consultations before taking major initiative. This is something new. It is nothing new in practice, but it's new that it's anchored clearly in the treaty in the context of the democratic nature of the Union. And then the citizens' initiative, that's a new initiative, new possibility for citizens to bring something on the agenda. Of course, citizens don't do it individually, they do it through and probably as boosted or how do you say, mobilized by the civil society organizations. So it's again, it's a tool for civil society organizations. We don't know what will it mean in practice because it has not really been applied and tested in real cases. Now, so when we come to these different natural standpoints, I take the 5 bodies as I mentioned. So now for Commission, the question of relationship between Commission and to civil society, it's mainly related to Commission's role as the institution who initiates policies and also as the institution who implements certain part of the policies. And there we come to the governance issues, the question between lobbying and informed decision making, and the transparency of the functioning of the institution and institutions, because Commission also initiates issues that influence the other institutions in their manner of and the way of working. And it's a question of ownership then, in that sense that if the working of the institution in relation to initiatives also is open, then you gain certain ownership by the stakeholders who can participate in the early reflections. Now, another angle for Commission is related to this neo-functionalist idea of the European Union, boosting EU integration through different sectors. So Commission favors the fact that civil society also organizes itself at the European level. There are good examples of that in some policy sector where there are strong European level organizations of civil society. Now, mobilizing stakeholders relates to the Commission role of implementing some of the policies. In some policies where you cannot regulate and you still want to get certain dynamism going on in the societies, you need stakeholders to carry on the agenda in the real world. And there again, Commission looks for partnership with civil society organizations then. And then, as mentioned earlier already, Commission implements many of the financing programs, and it provides financing through EU programs to civil society organizations. And what is notably important there is to know that many of the European level umbrella organizations, those who are representing civil society, which is originally organized at national level, these umbrella organizations, many of them, they receive a kind of operating grant from the European Union. So not only for specific projects, but also for their existence. So money for having staff, money for having the facilities. I would say that the relationship between Commission and civil society organizations, it is relatively positive by nature, but it's very complicated. Civil society organizations, of course, they function in a very different manner than public institutions, and therefore there is constantly a tension in the way of working. But I would say there is a relatively positive tone. Now, it differs very much and varies very much from one sector to another sector. But there are some notably related to the governance rules, and we come back to that later. There are some rules that are horizontal in the Commission. Now, about the European Parliament, maybe the main point is the first one, that there is this certain question and tension between the representative and direct democracy. And Parliament, who has this specific role of being the EU institution which is elected by the people, they sometimes feel that, okay, our role is a little bit undermined if civil society organizations start to have too strong role in interest representation at the EU level. And so traditionally it has been complex, this relationship. However, there are many concrete ways how civil society and Europe and European Parliament have actually organized the relationship. I have mentioned here, for example, these thematic intergroups. You know very well that European Parliament is organized according to political parties. I don't know actually, are they now 10 or 11, but they are around 10 parties. That sometimes evolves a little bit. But in addition to that, there are sometimes, they call them intergroups, groups organized around a certain policy issues. Sport is a good example because sport is so fascinating for many people, and there has been since many years, an intergroup on sport. So those members of the European Parliament who are particularly interested and who have in their own profile a relationship to sport world, they have created an interest group, and then they deliberate on these issues, and then they try to influence back their own political groups about these issues. And so that's one way how civil society has actually found its way to work together with the Parliament. Another one is the way of organizing hearings. Parliament organizes hearings when it's deliberating on legislative issues, and frequently the important civil society organizations in these fields are then have then opportunities to express themselves in front of the Parliament members. Now, budget initiatives, traditionally, you know, Parliament, when it used to have weaker position than it nowadays have, budget was one of the big issues, and Parliament used to use budget as a kind of tool, sometimes to create even specific funding for certain civil society organizations or initiatives that are important for civil society organizations. Now, the changing institutional role at the end is important to remember in that way that Parliament has, its role has increased gradually. It became more and more important. It became from a purely consultative body a co-legislator, but also because of certain even dramatic incidents in the history of the European Union, the relationship between Commission and Parliament changed in that way that nowadays Commission is listening very carefully what Parliament is saying. And this, of course, gives Parliament to certain possibilities to influence the use of the right of initiative by the Commission. And therefore then for civil society organizations also, if they want to influence the agenda, the future initiatives, sometimes the best way goes via Parliament, not directly with the Commission. If we have time to, and I think we will have time to take my story, then we will come to this issue also there. Okay, Economic and Social Committee. So I expect that you know by heart all the institutions and the bodies. So Economic and Social Committee is the one representing labor market organizations, so both employees and employers organizations, but also there is a third group which is called diverse, and it refers to other kind of civil society organizations. It has been there since the beginning of since the Treaty of Rome, and it has relatively weak institutional position traditionally. It's a consultative body, and it's not considered to be very powerful. Now, inside the Economic and Social Committee, there has been a tension traditionally between the recognized social partners, so the labor market organizations, and then the diverse. And traditionally, it used to be that the recognized social partners, they were the strong players inside the committee. But now there has been gradually a growing importance given to this diverse field of civil society organizations. It relates to this issue of the deliberative democracy coming on the agenda. And so inside the committee, the group diverse has gained power. And the committee itself has adopted a very proactive role of promoting civil society. I give you a concrete example. They provide the facilities free for use for the civil society organizations to organize conferences, meetings, when it does not coincide with the meetings of the committee itself. I would say the general tone is that it's towards a kind of active partnership approach. They certainly have a win-win situation if they cooperate. Another consultative body, Committee of the Regions, it also has a weak institutional position. The difference with Economic and Social Committee is that Committee of the Regions is a relatively new organization. It was created by the Maastricht Treaty, and so it responded to something which was topical in society, as a kind of increasing regional profiles. And there are therefore many expectations. There were many expectations. There have been some disappointments certainly already, but there are still expectations, and there is a kind of room for little bit increasing role for the Committee of the Regions. Now, one of the difficult issues for the Committee of the Regions from the very beginning was the articulation between this committee and the European level organizations that were already established to represent local and regional authorities. They considered themselves as founders of the Committee of the Regions. And in the early years of the Committee of the Regions, it was difficult to actually agree on who is saying what and when and how to coordinate. Now, there has been gradually increasing synergy between Committee of the Regions and these different organizations. Also gradually increasing synergy between the other organizations, except the committee, which is the formal body. When I tell you, for example, when Finland joined to the European Union in 1995, and Sweden joined at the same time. And when Finnish local authorities decided to establish an office in Brussels, and the Swedish local authorities also decided, and they were then thinking about putting a little bit things together and hiring a joint office premises, and then they also had a discussion with Danish, and it was extremely complicated and no trust between the players and so on. Finally they did. They were one of the first who actually merged, Finnish and Swedish, not the Danes. But nowadays, now you find a kind of house of regions, cities and regions, where you have, I don't know many, something like 20 or 30 different local and regional representative organizations sharing the house. And so there has been this kind of synergy developed. So Committee of the Regions is, in its relation to civil society, it's to a certain extent now being able to orchestrate the voice of cities and regions at the EU level. I still included a question mark after that conclusion. Now, I took the Council as a last one, although it's a very important organization. But it is for the reason that I think I'm not the only one who does not know, actually, is there a relationship between Council and civil society organizations? And actually, it relates to two issues. The one that is the first there, that Council has a strong position, of course, in decision-making in European Union. But it's late in the process. So for example, for civil society to influence something, if you try to do that when the issue is already at the Council, you probably are too late. And the second issue is the last one, that where is the Council, and who would be that I should lobby if I want to influence the Council? Because if you take European Parliament, okay, you have these 700 and X, I don't remember how many. How many members are in the European Parliament? 732, okay. You have 732 members. You know, there is your target. You have to find the right MEP and use that way. If you want to influence Commission, you come to humble civil servants at the European Commission, you influence them. Now, if you want to influence Council, it's not that clear. Who are the members of the Council?
Ministers and national solicitors.
Yeah, so it's member states actually, and then in practice ministers, or if you are a little bit earlier in the states, is civil servants, either those who are in your capital or those who are in Brussels, and it's all much less clear and transparent in that way. So anyway, if you want to influence Council, and you are, for example, a national, let's say, environmental organizations, maybe the best place to go is your own ministry in your own capital, not to try to go to Brussels. If you have to do it in Brussels, you have to find a way to all these 27 different national representations. Council Secretariat is really neutral, organizing the procedure, and does not have anything similar than Commission, civil service, or even in the Parliament you find, in addition to members, you find the assistants and you have the political groups. Council is more difficult. Now, there's also this intergovernmental starting point that traditionally Council works in closed doors. It's very, very different, very difficult then, and very different to follow the work of the Council than to follow the work of the Parliament, for example. And another point is that in its internal work, Council has a kind of natural reference point in national context. So if there is an issue which relates to civil society, quite often the way how those who are involved in the decision-making in Council look at this issue, even if they want to look at it in a European context, they reflect what they have experienced in their own country. And that makes the whole question more complicated. So therefore, my conclusion about that is to be discovered. It is interesting what, for example, this requirement to organize open and regular dialogue with civil society, what will it mean in practice for Council? Okay, about the European governance, and okay, I take that very quickly. I sent you a reference to white paper on governance 2001, and it was a kind of milestone in European governance. By the way, what does this white mean? What is the color here? White paper. What other color it could be? Cream paper could be also. And traditionally, cream paper is about consulting, about launching a debate, and white paper is normally about launching certain actions. So then there is already more understanding where we are going to. The white paper on governance in 2001 launched certain process of reorganizing the way of working in EU institutions, although it still included also a consultation aspect. It actually called for comments. Now, as a follow-up to this white paper on governance, which as a principle established as one of the coming actions, more dialogue between Commission and the civil society, earlier dialogue and better organized dialogue. As a follow-up then, relatively soon after that, minimum standards for consultation were approved. So there are kind of non-binding, but it's a kind of internal code of conduct in Commission, how Commission should consult stakeholders before taking major initiatives. Minimum standards relate, for example, to the timing, how much time the stakeholders should have to react to a consultation, how the feedback is organized. If there's a consultation, we don't only take it and say, okay, thank you for your comments. Commission should also then give feedback that what kind of influence, what are the Commission's position to the main comments received from the stakeholders and so on. Another follow-up to this was the transparency initiative, and very topical issue is the Lobbyist Register there. Since 2008, Commission has had a register for interest representatives. But now, since this year, since summer this year, there is a joint register for Parliament and Commission, where interest representatives should register themselves. And the basic idea is that if I, as Commission civil servant, I'm contacted by a civil society organization or by a business lobbyist, actually, I should only accept an appointment if they are registered in this registry. From the civil society webpage that I also gave you as a reference, you find your way to this Lobbyist Registry also. It's quite interesting issue. Has been very controversial in that terms that civil society does not want to be put in the same package as business representatives. They say we are not lobbyists because we are not lobbying a private interest. We are representing issues of general interest. But anyway, they are in the same registry. In some areas, that was already mentioned in the white paper of governance, and notably as the European Union's agenda has broadened to areas where it does not have regulatory powers, the kind of approach to work in a strategic partnership with civil society organizations have become also one way of working. I can give you an example from my current policy work. In the vocational training, we have an exercise of creating a credit transfer system for vocational training, so that it would be possible for learners in the area of vocational training, when they during their training they would go to another country and they spend there, for example, 3 months. When they come back, that there would be a joint systems how they can also get what they learned, how they get the learning outcomes integrated and recognized in their studies in own country. Now, we are boosting this system, of course, as a system between the member states, but at the same time, for example, automotive industry has been very interested to test, and then Commission works closely together with them to try to boost the system within that sector. So that's just as an example what strategic partnership can mean. Okay, we come to the question of the European year. So before we go to the volunteering, as a general introduction, what is European year, which kind of tool it is. And I have written the title, and it's a tool for shaping agenda, and it's a tool for awareness raising and mobilizing. Now look at the list. This is the list of European years, thematic issues that have been selected for a specific campaign in the European Union. And tell me what is striking in this list. Well, it's not striking, but evident. Okay, I help you. So if we think about which services in Commission would be in charge of this, 2012, active aging, it would be the Directorate General for Employment and Social Policy. Volunteering used to be within education and culture. When it was initiated, it was education and culture. Now there has been some reshuffling in Commission. It is the communication DG which is actually implementing the year now. 2010, against poverty and social exclusion, again, employment and social affairs. Creativity and innovation, 2009, it was DG Education and Culture. 2008, intercultural dialogue, it was education and culture. And 2007, equal opportunities, it was employment and social affairs. So what does this mean? It's not a monopoly of these two DGs, but it is evident that this is a tool to be used in the policy areas where competencies at the EU level are weak. So you need different kind of tools. You have not many directives. In the area of education and culture, for example, we have one directive. And so you cannot use legislative or regulatory tools. And one tool between the others is this kind of European level campaign a year. And notably, these two functions, you shape the agenda, you influence the further policy making through that, and you can use it for general awareness raising, like in international context also you have the global thematic years, you have also different weeks and days in national context in many countries. Now, there can be different origins for European years. We have cases where it's a top-down, commissioner wants to profile, he says, I want this year, I want to organize that. The year of intercultural dialogue was a little bit like that. In the education and culture we had Jan Figel, first commissioner in that area from the new countries, and he actually wanted to have a year where we boost the dialogue, cultural dialogue between the new member states and the previous 15. Now, finally, the year then had a product concept when it was implemented, but the original idea came relatively top-down from commissioner for this purpose. Now, sometimes they are really coming from the society, from civil society or other stakeholders, and then institutions respond to this kind of request coming from them. Now, it can also come from other institutions. The idea can come from the parliament or from the committees, I mean Committee of the Regions, Economic and Social Committee, or even other international players like in Europe, the Council of Europe has sometimes been strongly involved in initiating some of the years. And sometimes it can have a more technocratic origin, where commission services, the civil servants there have been thinking, well, how can we actually advance our agenda? How can we influence the policy making in this area? How can we get our issues in a stronger place on the agenda? Now, if we come to the European year of volunteering 2011, so this year now, and so I will tell you a little bit about the history, how it was initiated. Now, volunteering was traditionally, since I would say 10 years, 15 years, relatively strong part of the youth policy. The youth policy as such is one of the weak policy areas, but within that youth policy agenda, volunteering was one of the ideas that and issues that was targeted, both through a youth program where financing was provided, but also within a policy dialogue between the member states to advance the youth issues. Now, in 2006, I was actually leading at that time the citizenship unit, and we had a situation where two grant, or let's say one grant program was externalized, so that our unit stopped managing the grants. We gave it to the executive agency to handle, and then we had a kind of agenda building that what will be the role of this unit in the future. And then we were reflecting on this issue, and we said volunteering is one of the issues where we have, let's say, unused potential to look at the active citizenship issues. At the same time, there was in the European level, at European level, already a representative organization, European Volunteering Center. And it was selected as beneficiary of a operating grant in 2006. It was within the same program that we externalized from our unit, but we had still, of course, dialogue with the agency which was influencing that, implementing that, and so it coincided with our reflection of boosting the volunteering agenda. We also asked, so Commission asked Economic and Social Committee to make a kind of forward-looking opinion on volunteering issues in Europe. So Economic and Social Committee adopted an opinion on volunteering in 2006, and in that opinion, one of the ideas was a kind of European year of volunteering that they proposed. They had, when they worked in the Economic and Social Committee, as one of the experts, actually the leader of the European Volunteering Center. So from the civil society organization, the manager of that office was used by the Economic and Social Committee as an expert in that opinion making. Now, the European Volunteering Center then wanted to, they said, okay, we want to go ahead and try to organize a lobby to get this kind of European Year of Volunteering, and they started to create an alliance of organizations at the EU level who would like to promote European Year of Volunteering, and they created a kind of informal alliance between organizations in 2007. Now, this alliance did good work. They organized themselves, they did good lobbying, and one of the outcomes was then that in 2008, the European Parliament approved a kind of written declaration about European Year of Volunteering 2011. So there it had already been clarified in that way that they started to target certain year, 2011. Commission's reaction to this, this idea when it came from the Economic and Social Committee was a little bit reluctant. So even though in the citizenship unit we wanted to boost the volunteering agenda, we were not sure, even at the level of unit, that European year would be the best tool. You saw from the agenda, the chronology earlier, that there were already a couple of European years implemented by the DG Education and Culture, and there was certain fatigue for European years, and we were not very hot to take this initiative on board. And notably, our hierarchy at that time, Director General, she wanted to go for other type of actions rather than European year. So Commission was reluctant. Now, after this Parliament's written declaration, there was intensified lobbying from the civil society organizations first towards Commission, asking that, what are you going to do? When are you going to take the initiative to make the European year 2011 as a year of volunteering? And then they also mobilized the European Parliament to lobby. There were a couple of letters from the civil society sent to commissioners, including the president of the commission. And of course, then that thing came back to my unit to answer to these letters, and we drafted answers which were some kind of, yes, but answers, always. I think it was December 2008, then some of these key lobbyists on the civil society side contacted me. They wanted to have an appointment for themselves and for a member of the European Parliament who had been active in this issue. They had also a kind of intergroup there in the Parliament, and the main actor of the European Parliament members wanted to come to see me. We had in the Commission rules, and so I asked my hierarchy, can I receive this MEP? And they said, yes, see her and see how to get this. I had instructions to continue with this yes, but answer. And actually, when this Mrs. Harkin came into my office, she said, hello, Mr. Raivio, I am here to see together with you how we can make the European Year of Volunteering 2011 as effective as possible and go to the Commission initiative as soon as possible. So, see, I thought somehow I was within the French culture, so I thought she would come with a soft and subtle way, and no. And okay, I was in a situation where I had instructions to try to postpone, and even though I had started to understand the civil society, they were extremely disappointed when the Commission took this kind of postponing strategy. I had started to understand, because we were a little bit saying that, okay, maybe it would be a good idea for a new commissioner and new commission which would come into the office end of 2009, and then it would be one of the key initiatives for the new commissioner, and it could then no longer be 2011, maybe it could be 2013. And they said, we have mobilized thousands of people for 2011. We can never make it that they would understand that it's not 2011. Now, what I told to this member of the European Parliament, I told her that this is the last winter of this commission. There's no way that this file would move bottom up in the commission. I couldn't say more, but I counted that she would understand, and she understood. So she got it. What happened then in January 2009, there was a letter from all the presidents of the parliamentary groups sent to the president of the commission, saying that we expect that you quickly implement the declaration of the parliament to initiate the European Year of Volunteering for 2011. And when this letter then reached or went to the president, we understood that, okay, there is no way it will happen. And indeed, then in, where are we? In February 2009, I don't remember the date now, late in the evening, I got an email from Strasbourg, from the cabinet of my commissioner, Fiegel's commissioner, saying that today, President and Commissioner Fiegel decided that Commission will take the initiative to launch the European Year of Volunteering in 2011, make the Commission proposal ready before the parliamentary elections in June 2009. And so, you don't know how long it normally takes to make a Commission proposal, but it was extremely tight timetable to make it from February to June, but we did. So Commission proposal was adopted in June 2009, and Council decision on the year was also adopted in the same year in November 2009. I will come back to this issue of the time in November 2009 later. No, I'll come back to that now. So you have possibly read the decision of the European Year of Volunteering, because that was also one of the references you got. The date of that decision is, actually I forgot to print that now, but I think it was 29th of November 2009. Would anybody have an idea why this kind of time? What was in the game actually? It was extremely quick for council. Normally council takes 1 year for this kind of issues. When it's a co-decision, then it would be longer, but this was simple council decision. It would take 1 year. They did it in 6 months. Actually, what happened to me was that I was still there involved strongly when Commission adopted the proposal. I was still initiating that in a council working group in July 2009, and then life brought me something else, and I actually left the citizenship unit at that moment. And so my successor kept and brought the file through council in autumn. But okay, the date is important in that way that 1st of December the Lisbon Treaty came into the force. And it would have, if this decision would not have been taken by the council in November, it would have had extreme complications to the for some legal reasons to the decision making. So they also cooperated very well at the council and even Parliament, who gave its opinion quickly so that everything was ready for November. Now, you have seen the title of the European Year of Volunteering. It's not European Year of Volunteering. It says European Year of Voluntary Activities Promoting Active Citizenship. It's a crazy title. So why voluntary activities and not volunteering? This is just to kind of to show you how complicated it is sometimes in European context. In some countries, they were afraid of that if it said volunteering, it would in French mean volontariat, which means only this kind of cases where you go for another country for 6 months, or so organized long-term voluntary engagements. And it would exclude the kind of what they say in French, bénévolat, which is about everyday participation in voluntary activities. And so the year of volunteering became year of voluntary activities. It's very strange to have a year of activities, but okay, it became. Because then everybody said, okay, we accept that to go further. And why promoting active citizenship? This is a very good example of what happens, and that's a legal issue. There is always, when there is a proposal for council decision, there is a article in the treaty that is called as a legal basis. Based on certain article, we propose this. And in this case, the whole question of legal base was very complicated. We spent a lot of hours in Commission to reflect on that. And finally, what we had in our hands was the Pubel. I think it was X309, whatever. It's the one which gives then the general power for council to take necessary measures to ensure to ensure a smooth functioning of internal markets. So kind of case that is used only in exceptional cases if you don't have a real article. And so when Commission makes its proposal, then Council Legal Service is reading carefully all the legal aspects of that. And they said, no, you cannot use this article to promote volunteering. But you can use this article, because we have used it before, to promote active citizenship. So if you put the title Year of Voluntary Activities Promoting Active Citizenship, then it goes. And so in that way it was made. Okay, maybe I skip the 2 other reflections about how to read the decision. They would be similar reflections you see, but they are less interesting. I would take some concluding reflections now. You have seen that in this history what I outlined, multiplicity of players actually involved in taking the initiatives. It would be a little bit difficult for me to say whether this is a year coming from, no, I would still put this into category that it comes from bottom up, from the civil society organizations. But in the early stage, there was also a little bit this technocratic aspect that we reflected in Commission about this. And finally, to get Commission to take this initiative, Parliament played a strong role. So multiplicity of players involved in taking the initiative. Now, if you read the decision, then you will have the same for the implementation. That was actually one of the points I skipped. But there is very strong role for the civil society. So it's a year which was very much in the interest of civil society, and they will play a major role, and they are playing a major role in implementing that. And then multiplicity of roles by the same players in this process that you can also reflect. You can see Parliament first responding to the request of civil society, then later in the states they gave their opinion to the council, which influenced the budget of the year. And again, like Commission always, we were early in the reflections. Commission made a formal proposal, and Commission has the main responsibility of the implementation, including using the budget for the year. And okay, now maybe somebody wants to know what about the impact? Is something moving in the area of volunteering in Europe? I called my colleagues who are now working with this, and they said, concerning the awareness raising, they have been relatively successful in the campaign aspects in the member states. Of course, the society is there in the member states, and they have been able to promote generally about the European, about the volunteering. We skipped the aspect of objectives of the year now. But another objective for this year was to, and that was the main objective, was to create more conducive conditions for volunteering. And in that respect, there are already now 2 member states who have actually adopted a new legislation which facilitates the volunteering issues in their country. It's important, and in this whole question of volunteering and civil society, we have, of course, different traditions in different member states. And notably, in those member states who used to be socialist countries, volunteering is very complicated term to be used, because they used to have compulsory volunteering in the past. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, you have my email address here, and if anybody of you you are interested in these issues or other issues afterwards, email me and make an appointment. I am located on this floor, and I'm happy to discuss later. But of course, now the floor is open for questions.
I just have a sort of technical question. How much of the EU budget is allocated to civil society?
You are like a member of the European Parliament. They always put these kind of questions. It's very difficult to actually identify exactly. I can tell you that the program that we were implementing, which was directly, it was about active European citizens, including some core funding for civil society organizations, but also including money for projects. We had about 30 million euros per year. It's peanuts. It's very, very small. But in addition to that, you find on sectoral basis from different thematic areas programs where civil society organizations can participate. In the area of education, in the area of social affairs, in the area of environmental policy, in the area of international cooperation and aid to developing countries. And I wouldn't have you to figure how much totally, but actually this kind of parliamentary question has certainly recently been asked, so probably by Google you could find it. somebody has answered and tried to put together all that money.
How much did the civil programs contribute to like a Europification of identity? And is that kind of implicit within the committee's endorsement?
Contributed the
To
building of European identity.
Yes.
Yeah. It's also very complex. I mean, the question of how to measure the impact of a program, it's very difficult. Therefore, that you cannot control the other happenings. I mean, if we have a program to promote the European identity, and then the Greece goes to bankrupt, they influence the same, have an impact on the same issue in the society. So it's not possible really to capture. I have myself an understanding that actually we have a kind of working hypothesis that when you put actors together and make them to work together, they also at the same time somehow construct together a joint identity, and that contributes to mutual trust. And therefore, a kind of horizontal aspect of this issue is probably the most influential. So getting civil society organizations, let's take an example, for example, those working with poverty issues, put them together from different countries and get these people to work together, probably has, and certainly has a kind of identity building issue, even a solidarity building issue. But the money that we have for such a purpose at European level, it's very limited. So it's a very interesting question then, who should we target? And there is always pressure of targeting those who are not involved, who are not yet involved. But it's probably not the best use of the money, because it's probably better to use to take those who are opinion leaders and who will have the multiplier effect. And therefore there is a kind of tendency to concentrate on a kind of systemic issues which create a kind of systemic cooperation between the organizations, and not going direct to the level involving citizens in these activities. Please.
My question has more to do with the interplay between civil society and the average European. The recent Eurobarometer reported in August indicates that 62% of European citizens do not feel their individual voices are represented at the supranational level. What's more, the Commission, Parliament, Central Bank, and Council have suffered over the course of the last 4 years a decrease in favorability of 12, 11, 13, and 7 percentage points respectively. Would it not be beneficial for civil society to pursue its own initiative aimed at mitigating the disparity between the citizenry and the state? For example, could a series of well-structured town hall meetings sponsored solely by civil organizations rejuvenate faith in the post-national form of governance?
Can you repeat the last part of the question so that I get the storyline? I capture the storyline.
The very last part?
Yeah, well, yes.
Okay.
I got the first that okay, there is decreasing
Right.
trust of the institutions. I know that.
Right.
And the second part, you would suggest that the civil society would, rather than participating in EU programs,
Right. That it would organize a series of town hall meetings, incorporating the citizen and the organization, discussing the issues there, and then making them feel as if they are actually part of the system.
yeah, that it would make sense, yes, as much as possible. And the question of European identity is interesting in that respect. That very often we hear this kind of how do you call it? The kind of model of an onion, or the Russian, what is it?
Russian doll.
Doll, yeah. That there are different layers. That you have your local identity, then your national identity, then you have another layer of European identity. It's wrong. In my opinion, it's a wrong model. It doesn't work. European identity should be a color that is injected and influences your local and national identity, so that being a Bavarian, which is a strong local identity in Germany, Bavaria, would automatically mean that, okay, I'm also European and my Bayern belongs to the European Union. Now, concrete activities at the town hall level, the level of local authorities, that is really very important. In this citizenship program that Union has, there's a big part of that goes to these town twinning activities. It's a sister city, I think, known as in US, where actually very small activities take place in a local context, and but together with a partner town from another country. And the idea there is that they look at local issues, but in a European context. Now, so it's very important line of action, but it takes a lot of time and resources to build in that way. But yes, reasonable line of action. There was, yeah, please.
I was just curious as to your thoughts on, since the financial crisis is so large and affecting especially youth employment, since youth employment is so high, do you think that this would encourage youth to go out and volunteer more, or do you think on the other side of the coin that it could potentially, it's the EU's problem, therefore why would I volunteer in a larger sense like that?
Okay, the whole question of and the interaction between volunteering and employment is a difficult one. When I told you that the Director General of my DG, Education and Culture, was reluctant concerning the year of volunteering, was probably partly because of her background. She used to be the Director General for Employment before. And she was saying, for her, the kind of possible job substitution aspect, and the aspect that that volunteering is an issue for young people, it's probably still in practice in societies, it's more issue for women than for men, and it's for older people. She said promoting volunteering can be understood as counterproductive to our employment targets, which was about raising employment rate. Now, there's a lot of evidence actually that when you participate in voluntary activities, you learn new skills, new competencies, which can be recognized and which are recognized actually by employers very much, because they evaluate kind of real life situation skills. And so it is from that angle, volunteering is very compatible with employment agenda. And the crisis context was actually then when we prepared the Commission proposal in 2009, the crisis was there as a main framework. And in the Commission proposal, there is a kind of introductory text to that was very much highlighted that in this situation when at that time we said, and that was right, that the societal consequences of the crisis are still actually only coming, we need to mobilize all possible means to keep people active rather than getting marginalized. And so volunteering is therefore possible to see as a complementary to employment strategies. Now, what is this international dimension there? Whether crisis influences the fact that whether you volunteer in a product context or in a local context, I don't know if it has an impact on that. You were next year.
Yeah, I have a question about the European Transparency Initiative and specifically about the Lobbyist Registry, because I was wondering how it has, whether it actually has had an effect and how the Commission deals with civil society. And also you were saying that now it's a joint register together with the European Parliament, and I was wondering how this works in practice, because before the European Parliament register was more about everyone who had access to the building, and is it now different or has it changed?
Yeah, well, it has the main idea. Now, I don't have you first-hand experience on the how the new register works. It was launched in June, and I happily came here in July, so so I don't have experience on that. But the main idea there is that, you know, within the register you have a certain code of conduct that when you put your organization in the register, you also commit yourself to apply certain principles. And there is it's a simple code of conduct which is there. It states the principles that when you contact EU officials, you identify yourself and your organization. When you get information from there, you will never distribute that and giving somebody else, a third party, to understand that you speak on behalf of the institution. This kind of issues. Secondly, there is a transparency concerning the financing. Who is paying you? And that was, of course, difficult to many organizations. But that's one of the principles that, and it's public register, so that also citizens should be able to see who are playing there, who are influencing, and who is paying. Now, interinstitutional cooperation is always complicated. So what will be the future? How it will work together? It's interesting. I think there is so much political will behind that they will find a way to put it working in practice, and they will learn during the process. It is also interesting in that way that there are many other areas where joint tools actually have been under reflection but not yet implemented. I give you an example. If you want to visit the institutions, you have different visitor service in Commission and in the Parliament. Or if you go to the member states of the European Union, you go to Helsinki, for example, you find there an office of European Parliament and an office of European Commission distributing the good news. And so possibilities for synergies between the institutions are actually huge. Now, how this kind of agenda would advance, you need some areas where you go first. And I think this is one of those where now a very concrete tool has been created and put in practice together. So I expect it will be a good one. It is certainly under continuous review and evaluation. Please.
This sort of goes with that question, but I think you mentioned before that the commission is sort of getting burned out on thematic years.
Commission
was getting burned out on thematic years.
I meant the DC educational culture at that
Okay.
time. We had many of them, but please go on.
Well, just if that was still the case, and you know, sort of the monopoly between the two.
I think there will be another citizenship-related year coming, and that is a top-down issue. And I'm not sure whether it's 13 or 14. No, it's 13. 13 will most likely be a year of European citizenship, and it will probably focus on more on the legal aspects of the citizenship. So what actually was established by the Maastricht Treaty, the certain rights related to elections, external representation services, and so on. So this core legal aspects of European citizenship. And there has been some reflections about European Year of Education in 2014. So we have a new commissioner in education, and also she wants to have her year. So it's not over. I mean, it will continue certainly. But at a certain moment when we had in education and culture the 2008 and 2009, it was not the best time to lobby for another one for 2011, again implemented by the same DG. It was just an anecdote in that way. Please.
What effect do you think will the current crisis have on the identity, like the European identity, especially on the member state level? Do you think this will damage this identity, or you think it will become stronger? And then do you think at some point on the European level, there will be maybe policy, maybe a year of, I don't know, solidarity, whereas there's a certain way of counteracting?
I think related to the financial crisis and the euro crisis and so on, there it appears to me that at the EU level there has been a choice of concentrating on the big issues and not to create diversity of initiatives related to possible consequences and at the different levels. So I couldn't imagine a European year mainly created as a response to the crisis in that way. Now, what would be my... So when I say concentrating on big issues, it's really the questions of getting the fiscal issues right and saving the Eurozone now and getting the future governance in this area right. So I am sure that there's a strategic choice on concentrating these big issues. Now, what kind of effects it has in societies, again, very difficult to analyze. I can refer to certain recent elections, also including the ones in my country, for example, in Finland. We had elections in April this year, and there was a new kind of populistic party which increased enormously its support, partly by using the Eurosceptic themes in their campaign. And these are very subtle issues. In Finland, traditionally, the sequence of elections actually was such that the election should have been in March, like normally middle of March. And I don't know what was the technical reason, but it was decided something like a couple of 2 years ago that this time they will be in April. And I'm sure it had a big influence and impact in the results, because if you go back to the history of the chronology of the crisis, it was the Portugal that failed in between. And so the Portuguese aid or rescue package became just in the middle of the hottest campaign, and it had an influence. Now, on the other hand, in all these debates also big part of the people do understand the interdependency that is there between the countries, in the European context and even in a global context. And to a certain extent, the fact that member states have been ready to act, even if the decision making has been difficult and not so quick as some other operators would have expected. The fact that European Union still has been able to take decisions which fundamentally actually has this solidarity aspect, it shows to a certain extent that the functionalist or neo-functionalist theory works in that way that the member states are so much dependent on each other that it is in everybody's own interest to keep this integration going further rather than letting it to real crisis. And there is big part of the population who do understand also this. Now, always the part, like in Finland, the party that I refer to got something like 17% of the votes. That got a lot of attention. 17 or 18, it still means that 80% voted something else. Now, very difficult to see how it will develop. Both directions are possible. Europe has went through many crises, and normally the story is that it was stronger after the crisis. We will see. Okay, thank you very much. This was a very enjoyable discussion, and as I said, if you are interested in this or in any of the if you have any other issues that you are reflecting for your thesis or whatever, I'm a resource available, so you are free to, welcome to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.